Haha. Alright, let's go in here. Oh shit, Alright buddy, we can talk about this. Tormented Souls is a traditional survival horror game released in 2021 and developed by Dual Effect and Abstract Digital. Anyone who's followed my channel for a while or looks through my video history can probably gather that I really love horror, and I especially have a soft spot for ones like the classic Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Alone in the Dark games. So when I saw this game on my Steam store page, I was all over it. Hell, the game is even set in British Columbia, Canada, where I live, which is pretty novel. Despite all the interest I had walking in, Tormented Souls really let me down. While it has some interesting features, the game failed to capture the magic of its inspirations or make a very compelling game on its own merits. The biggest flaws I have to point out are the numerous technical issues that plague Tormented Souls. For the record, I'm playing the PC version for this review, and while trusted sources tell me that the PS5 release lacks a lot of the issues I'm having, the Steam version being such a mess is definitely something we have to address. Right off the bat, the game crashes fairly frequently, with both hard crashes closing the program and soft crashes such as black screens happening. Little hiccups like AI pathing issues and no lip movement are more forgivable, but incorrect line dubbing and a lack of a proper windowed mode in a 2021 PC release really got on my nerves. The worst example of the dubbing, just for an example, being when the game straight up gives you contradicting directions about where to go next.
Where can I find Dr. Williams' office?
You can find Dr. Williams' office on the second floor of the West Wing.
You may as well be told to go Weast. And on the topic of woeful PC options for a modern day release, the hard limit of 3 save slots is pretty brutal when you pair that with the crashing issues and another save related flaw we'll get to in a moment. That save issue being how Tormented Souls brings back the limited saves from classic Resident Evil in a way that is far more punishing than any other game in the genre, at least to my knowledge. For those unfamiliar with this system, in the older Resident Evils, you had to use a consumable item to save your progress. For a game all about resource management, having your checkpoints be tied to a consumable made some sort of sense, and it tied back to the core gameplay loop itself. However, even in the very original release of Resident Evil for the PlayStation 1, you know, the fat box version, that game gave you 2 saves per consumable item, with later games giving you 3 saves per item. In Tormented Souls, you get 1 save per item. This is needlessly punishing, especially when you take into consideration that you actually get less save slots in this game than in Resident Evil 1, while also having to contend with the aforementioned crashing issues that the PS1 game never had to deal with. On top of that, having such a limiting save system really only serves to make the game needlessly frustrating during the early portions, where you have to hoard saves because you're encouraged to. By the end game, I was essentially drowning with the save items, having more than I would ever realistically use at that point. It was a behavior the game encouraged, so I don't think I'll be alone with this. Mechanically, Tormented Souls is fairly bare bones. 3 weapons, 4 if you include the crowbar I suppose, 2 types of healing items, very samey enemies, all in all, not too much to write home about. One feature that is appreciated is a dodge that you can pull off while aiming a weapon. The little hop backwards can actually be a lifesaver sometimes, and helps to deal with some of the issues of the combat. The biggest flaw with it has to be how the game's environment is not designed with it in mind, however. With survival horror games, fight and flight are usually presented as both valid options, with the latter being necessary at times to conserve scarce resources. The thing is, the cramped hallways and geometry-cluttered environments of Tormented Souls really don't allow for flight as a consistently viable options. When paired to the unusually large enemy hitboxes and little things like how the starting spitter enemies can shoot their projectiles through walls and clutter in the environment, you're forced into killing enemies more often than not. I describe the game balancing of Tormented Souls as punishing above all else. See, the game isn't actually hard, at least while we're talking about the combat, but when you do make a mistake, the game will grind you into the dirt for it. The main character has a skeleton made of glass and paper, I guess, and even just a few hits from starting enemies is enough to take her out. And when you tie the fragility of the player character with the issues around fleeing, save bottlenecking, and the crashing habit the game has, you end up with something far more frustrating than it has any right to be. All this talk, and we really haven't even gotten to the core of Tormented Souls as a game. Make no mistake, the main gameplay hook of this are the puzzles. In the game's defense, this is fairly standard for essentially every game in the genre that is attempting to emulate, but Tormented Souls sets itself apart from the pack due to the sheer volume at which it pumps these at you. This might be the most single puzzle-dense game not labeled a puzzle game that I've ever played. This wouldn't be too bad if the puzzles were good, but what makes the game exhausting to slog through is how hit and miss the brain teasers are. Admittedly, there are some clever ones here. The floppy disk puzzle flew right over my smooth zoomer brain, but I can at least see how some real thought went into it. And I did enjoy the infinite door poem puzzle as well. Really felt like the kinds of tasks you'd be doing in something like a classic Silent Hill game. However, it's just like my buddy Dave says. You're either gonna get them, or you're not. Some of them are just finicky and irritating, like the power adjustable stapler and the gas can that isn't immediately open when you pick it up. Some of them can have multiple valid readings, like the monkey hear, speak, and see no evil written word puzzle. And some of them can just be straight abstract, like the safe television puzzle, which coincidentally is a spot where my game black screened twice in a row. Both the quality and quantity of the puzzles really does the game no favors. There is at least one area Tormented Souls does well in. The game really does understand how to make genuinely good survival horror level design. The game environment is fairly small overall, at least from memory smaller than the mansion from Resident Evil 1, but the game makes great use of what it does have. Backtracking is generally kept to a minimum, and when it does occur, the destination is rarely very far from your current location. Plus, the game makes fairly good use of shortcuts as well. You slowly open up more chunks of the map as well, which helps keeps the game fresh as you progress through it. I really have no complaints about this part of the game. It's genuinely solid stuff, and it does level layouts better than some Resident Evil games even. What isn't solid is the game's editing and localization. We briefly touched on this with the Go Weast directions earlier, but it doesn't end there. Certain characters' names are reversed in text documents, and occasionally straight up incorrect labels will be put on items. The voice actors will say lines not in the subtitles, and it becomes often enough that it's very jarring very early on. I guess what I'm saying is, if my dumbass can notice so many errors like this while streaming and having a few beers, I think it's safe to say the game needed some proofreading. And when you pair this kind of poor editing with text-heavy puzzles, good luck. You may have noticed how often I use an example of different individual issues being made worse by adding others on top of it. Really, that is my core complaint with the gameplay of Tormented Souls. The game really suffers from death by 1,000 cuts. All of these individual complaints might have been at least tolerable on their own, but they all complement each other in the worst possible ways, and make the whole piece worse while acting in unison. The way all these individual issues mix and match together make Tormented Souls a fairly miserable experience to play a lot of the time. And the story? Well, frankly, there's not enough here to salvage the gameplay experience. It's strange, too, because you would think a story as batshit insane as Tormented Souls would at least warrant some sort of in-depth discussion. After all, the game goes places. Time travel, Lovecraftian old gods, ancient ritual sacrifice on native burial grounds, supernatural radiation that turns people into skeletons, among other things, literally hell, which the game never explains. The game's got it all. These are all aspects of Tormented Souls, but frankly, the game never does much with it due to the bone-dry presentation. It does that thing where very little active plot is happening in the moment, but the game has truckloads of lore given to you in text files. We already went over how the writing isn't exactly final draft worthy, but what makes it worse is how the lore isn't as optional as the game would lead you to believe. You have to read certain text documents only to find puzzle solutions hidden inside them, You never know when this is going to be the case, so you have to keep your eyes open on basically all of them for a first run. And with how insane the game gets, it's very disappointing how mundane the presentation is. Even the voice actors sound bored half the time while presenting these insane concepts. For material as insane, over the top, and goofy as this, it's like, just try hamming it up a little. Tormented Souls is an interesting first swing at the genre from, to my knowledge, a new developer. A lot of compounding mistakes really drag it down on the whole, however. I went in really wanting to like this game, and I respect the studio for attempting to create what is essentially a modern-day successor to the original Alone in the Dark, but for a brand new team, they may have bitten off more than they can chew. I'll definitely keep my eyes open for whatever they do next, since another shot at the genre could be better, but as is, Tormented Souls really is not recommended.